Today is October 8th, 2024, and I'm William Michael, the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And recently, providentially it seems, I've received a number of contacts asking for some discussion of modern mathematics, what the Classical Liberal Arts Academy recommends, does, suggests, and so on regarding modern mathematics. And having received questions from a number of different angles, I'd like to take some time to dig into this question because it's obviously very important, but I think there's a lot of complicating factors that don't get discussed, and as a classicist who runs a classical Catholic educational program, I'd like to talk about these things and provide my thoughts, the thoughts that guide the Classical Liberal Arts Academy on these issues, because they're important for modern students, and I'd like for us to be able to think about them carefully and responsibly, especially in light of our overall responsibilities in Catholic education. And remember, I'm speaking as the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. I'm not speaking as the principal or superintendent of a modern public school, even a modern private school. I'm not speaking as a representative of the so-called classical education movement, which I explain really isn't concerned with historic classical education. I'm speaking exclusively and very specifically as the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, where we have very specific goals, a very clear mission, and we're going to pursue that mission without compromise. So the question is, what should kids do? What should kids do with respect to modern mathematics? And there's a broad range of responses to this. Some want to go all in on modern mathematics, and they think it's just the most important subject in the world. Others want to avoid it completely, and obviously the truth probably lies somewhere between those two extremes. But at the same time, it's important to note that parents ultimately make decisions regarding the education of their children. It's a right of parents to decide a school for their children to attend, and one option for schooling is homeschooling. There's not a rule for what children have to do. Normally, your desired outcomes determine what your children need to do as parents. So sometimes parents have desired outcomes or goals, and beliefs or practices that don't agree with each other, and that causes some conflict. But normally when there are clear goals, responsible, reasonable goals, and practices, objectives and tasks that are in harmony with those goals, there's no problem. But for most families, there's just all kinds of disagreement between expected outcomes, desires, goals, ambitions, plans, and what they're actually doing or what they should do. And that's the kind of thing I'd like to talk about here. So bear with me. My talks are normally long because I like to dig into things and sort of let my own thoughts go where I feel they need to go as we get into the topic. And I've also got a text I'd like to share today for us to consider together. So I intend these talks to be listened to while people drive to work or do household chores or cut the grass, whatever. So bear with me if I wander at times. These aren't scripted or prepared lectures. So the question, as I said, is what should we do about modern mathematics? And again, I said I'm speaking as the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, where our mission is to research, restore, publish, and teach the classical liberal arts, to pursue a course of studies that was known to wise men and saints through history. And our goal, or the priority, I should say, in our study program is to prepare ourselves for the Catholic life. That's really our goal. Our goal is not to prepare for some specific college admission plan or some career path or whatever. It's really to prepare to live as a Catholic man or woman, regardless of our historical context. And when we consider, what course we should follow in order to pursue that, I think it's wise for us to pursue a course that was practiced by saints through history and also recommended to us by wise men and saints through history. And I want to note, not just by saints in history, but by wise men in general in history. When we go back, the classical liberal arts didn't start with Christianity. They weren't revealed by the Holy Spirit after Pentecost. The classical liberal arts predated Christianity. And so this isn't some Christian idea. This isn't some, fabrication of believers about learning and education. This is what education was about before Christianity even emerged. And then through Christian history, Christian teaching and this philosophical tradition merged in scholasticism. So this can't be dismissed as some sort of religious idea. It's much more significant than that. So when we look at education, we say, well, what's the goal of education? And we say we want to become wise men. Aristotle in the Ethics said we want to actually be good men, not just know good things, but actually be good men. That's the goal, to actually live a good life, to serve God in the best way possible, as I often say. So when we look at the plan for our studies, when those are our goals, so I'm not talking to a general audience who doesn't share our goals, doesn't share our beliefs, doesn't share our respect for ancient wisdom and things. I'm not talking to an audience that rejects all of our principles. I'm talking to an audience that shares our principles, that shares our goals, shares our values, and so on. Where should we look for guidance with respect to education? And I also want to say, not just for our children. We shouldn't set ourselves up like these hypocritical Pharisees worried about what other people need to do. This is about our own education. This is about my education. What should I be studying as a Catholic man? And consequently, what should my children also be studying? So hopefully, with the help of God's grace, they can get a head start on the learning that I myself am devoted to. So we want to look to the saints and wise men of the past, and we've got volumes and volumes of resources that teach us what we should do and what we should seek to achieve, what the objectives are, and so forth. And I've summarized a lot of this in a book that's available freely on the Academy website. If you go to classicalliberarts.com and just scroll down on the page, you'll find a link to a free book called Understanding Classical Catholic Education, where I basically survey the history of education from ancient Israel all the way through pagan nations into Christian history, through medieval Europe and to the present day. So I recommend that if you'd like to dig into that a little bit. And it's easy to read. So I recommend we look to the wise men and saints for guidance, and that's what we're seeking to do in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Now, the problem we face in modern education, the problem we face is that our governments have established compulsory education laws. So we're not just free to do whatever we want. We're not free to take all of our time and just work together in a family business or work together to study philosophy and religion. We're also obligated to satisfy modern requirements. And I don't think there's anything about these requirements that conflicts or prevents us from pursuing a real classical Catholic education. But we have to satisfy modern requirements as efficiently as possible, and this takes some prudence. We can't afford to waste time on all sorts of modern fads and ideas and changing standards and things like that. We can't play with that stuff because we've already got a substantial curriculum to work through. And we've got to be very careful, and this is where I think Christians make some significant mistakes. We can't allow modern schooling and what modern schools do to distract us from our principal goal. And it's appropriate today because if you were at Mass this morning, you know that today's reading is the story of Mary and Martha, where Jesus tells Martha, one thing is necessary. We have to be reminded of that as well. One thing is necessary. We can't justify, pursuing 1,000 different ends in learning while we neglect, let's say, divine revelation. That doesn't make any sense. So if we want to focus on the Catholic faith, we want to focus on the pursuit of wisdom, even if we're not Christians. Focus on the pursuit of wisdom. Wise men throughout history tell us what we need to do, and they direct us to the 7 liberal arts. Now that provides us with more than we can handle already, and we'll spend our whole lives working to study and learn the 7 liberal arts and the philosophical sciences and theological sciences. We've already got a lifetime of study ahead of us. So we've got tons of content to focus on. But what's important to realize is there's a time for everything. And so when we're talking about grade level requirements, we're talking about just a phase of life where our lifelong studies are distracted by some modern requirements that we need to complete. It's just like paying taxes or fulfilling any other obligation to our society. We just have to get it done because it's required. It's a part of communal living. So we want to satisfy these requirements, but we've got to be very careful that we give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's, and that we don't give Caesar 10 times more than he asks for just because we don't want to take responsibility for what we owe to God. So we've got to be careful. And this is where I think Christians make mistakes. I think they hear about secular requirements, they hear about college admission requirements. 90% of what they hear is sort of hearsay and not really true, and then they use that as an excuse to pretend that they're too busy to actually devote themselves to the pursuit of wisdom. Now, I want to show that this is not just my crazy concern or warning to Christian families, that if you're not careful, you can end up making an excuse out of modern requirements that's irresponsible. I want to share with you a passage from a text that was written by Pope Pius X, and this is from the 20th century. So this is not some ancient, outdated document that I pulled up out of, ancient Roman literature. This is a 20th century papal encyclical talking to us about the dangers of modern education with balance also. So I want to read this. Let me share it real quick. You see here, this is paragraph 47 from Pope Pius X's document, Pascendi Dominici Gregis, or Against the Modernists is the English title. You can look it up. If you just Google Pascendi, you'll come to the text. But this is in paragraph number 47, and it's important. And again, I want you to see the balance that Pope Pius X has in his advice here. But I would also like you to see the warning that he gives. Okay. He says, with regard to profane studies, and by profane he simply means secular studies, with regard to profane studies, suffice it to recall here what our predecessor, that is Pope Leo XIII, suffice it to recall here what our predecessor has admirably said. So these are the words of Pope Leo XIII. Apply yourselves energetically to the study of the natural sciences. The brilliant discoveries and the bold and useful applications of them that come after us, made in our times, which have won such applause by our contemporaries, will be an object of perpetual praise for those that come after us. So Pope Leo XIII, recognizing the achievement of modern sciences, says, Christians are free to pursue these things. Christians are encouraged to pursue the study of the natural sciences with all of the wonderful, useful, I emphasize useful, benefits that they bring to human life. It's great. There's no objection or aversion to the study of the modern natural sciences. However, notice this but here. But this do without interfering with sacred studies. Do this without interfering with sacred studies. And so we see here in this warning that there's some restriction placed on this pursuit of the study of the natural sciences. There's a restriction placed on it. Just because profane studies, natural sciences, and so on, and when we talk about natural sciences, modern mathematics is included in that because modern natural sciences are based on mathematics. That's the whole point of Newtonian science. Because mathematics is included within the natural sciences, we're not just free to just go run after these things as if it's all that matters. We've got to do this without interfering with sacred studies. So we've got to be careful that we maintain our responsibility. We've got more to do than just discover interesting new things. We've also got to make sure that we're serving our chief end. Do this without interfering with sacred studies. As our predecessor, again, this is Leo the 13th, in these most grave words prescribed, if you carefully search for the cause of errors, and he's talking against modernism in this encyclical, if you carefully search for the cause of those errors, you will find that it lies in the fact that in these days, when the natural sciences absorb so much study, the more severe and lofty studies have been proportionately neglected. Some of them have almost passed into oblivion. Some of them are pursued in a half-hearted or superficial way. And sad to say, now that they are fallen from their old estate, they have been disfigured by perverse doctrines and monstrous errors. We ordain, therefore, that the study of natural science in the seminaries be carried on under this law. So we have a warning here from Pope Leo the 13th and from Pope Pius X. And we can see there that the context of this is primarily concerned with seminaries, right? But what I want to focus on is the principle that's touched on in this passage. That there's only so much room in this box, this curriculum box, and there's a lot of stuff we can put in this box, but we've got to be careful to consider when we put things in, there's also things that are left out. And we've got to make sure that as our first priority, we've got all of what Pope Leo called the more severe and lofty studies. We've got to make sure that they're in the box, and then we add as much as we can. And if something gets left out, it's something that is either not important, not necessary for us to study, or something that simply can be taken up at a different time. So we've got to be careful because we're limited. We're limited in time, we're limited in financial resources, we're limited in mental energy that's available for these studies. We've got to make sure that our studies are prioritized. And if we do pursue modern or any profane studies, we've got to make sure that we've got everything prioritized and we're not just running out of control using modern requirements or modern, modern fads and things as the excuse for what we do. So I just wanted to establish this as the context for everything that I'm about to say about modern mathematics, because there are a lot of preliminary issues to think about before we start talking about textbooks and programs and curriculum and all this stuff. There's important preliminary information. There are priorities to consider before we enter into these issues. And when I approach them in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, it's with this preliminary work being done. And again, I'm saying this for people who share my concerns, who share my goals in learning, who share my values. I'm not presenting this to public schools as what they should do. I'm saying, if you're interested in the goals and mission of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, this is what I believe we should do with respect to modern mathematics. Now, when we come to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, I say these very simple things. We need to pursue classical Catholic studies as the more what was the phrase again? More severe and lofty studies, right? We've got to get into philosophy. We want to get into theology. We want to get into those studies at a certain point in our lives, especially with respect to our children. We want to introduce our children to contemplative life, to philosophical studies, to theological studies, before they make their life's vocational decisions. We want them to have an introduction to important aspects of study and life before they start zeroing in on an occupational interest of theirs or anything else. We want to make sure that they're introduced to these more severe and lofty studies. And this has been really the mission, my mission in education. It's been to bring a lot of these studies down into the K-12 program so that we can introduce kids to them before they've already made their life decisions. And what happened to me personally was I was 20, 21 years old studying classics. Actually, I was a pre-med student. And then I started to get into ethical questions in medical studies, in pre-medical studies, and scientific studies. I started getting into ethical questions as a Christian, and I realized I have no way to answer these questions. I have no framework at all to take up complicated ethical issues, especially in modern society, questions about the use of medication, surgical procedures, abortion, all these different issues. I was completely unprepared for the ethical questions, and I knew that I was getting myself into trouble as I pursued a medical career without a philosophical or theological foundation first. And that's what led me to actually say, this career path is not for me, because it's I'm not capable of entering into it with a clear Christian mind and understanding of what's right and wrong, which is more important than anything that can be done in physical sciences or in medical care. I need to focus on this foundation that I lack, and so I actually shifted my studies from modern science and pre-medical studies to classical Christian studies while I was in college, and pursued answers to these questions. So I was not prepared, and this is the danger of saying, oh, well, we can save philosophy, we can save classical languages, we can save all this stuff for college. Kids can be introduced to the scriptures and to the Summa Theologica and the Catechism. They can get all that if they go to a Catholic college. The problem is it's too late. Many of them are already making vocational decisions with no influence from those sources, and that's just not intelligent. So when I was 20, 21, 22 years old, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to devote myself to education, to bring these studies down back where they need to be, into the K-12 years where kids can be introduced to them before they start making vocational decisions ignorantly. And so that's what we're working to do in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. When we go back into history, we read stories about saints like Saint Dominic. We read stories about how he was sent to the university at age 14 and immersed in classical Catholic studies, immersed in Aristotelian philosophy and Catholic theology. He wasn't 22 years old. He wasn't 25 years old when these studies started. He started these studies when he was a young adult, even a teenager. And when we look at modern Catholic schools, we find everything being pushed off into college when the kids are already making the biggest decisions of their lives before then. And so you just see the timing of these things makes no sense. And I think that's a key fundamental error in modern education that's largely responsible for this vocation crisis that plagues the church. We've got kids talking about wanting to glorify God as doctors and engineers and lawyers and architects and all this stuff, and no one thinks it's glorifying to God to be a priest or a monk or a nun or brother or sister. And you just see how this idea of vocation has been flipped upside down, as if the world is panting and begging for new bridges and buildings and computer software rather than for priests and evangelists and missionaries. It really doesn't make any sense. But I think the problem is educational. And this is, again, what our mission seeks to undo in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. So seeing that warning from both Pope Leo XIII and Pope Pius X, and again, these aren't medieval documents. Pope Leo XIII wrote in the late 19th century. Pope Pius X wrote in the early 20th century. These are recent modern church documents that I think need to be present in our minds when we enter into these questions of what we should study and how we should study and when we should study and so on. I mean, Pope Pius X is talking about seminaries. We hardly have a need for seminaries anymore because no one's interested in religious life or even contemplative life. So we've got problems to deal with, and I think that the problems are being caused by the order of studies in education. So anyway, having said all that, when we come to modern mathematics, I want to keep an eye on time here. When we come to modern mathematics, the question is, with all these things in mind, what should we do? What should we do with all these things in mind? And my argument in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is that we should establish ourselves in the Classical Liberal Arts, what we call our core curriculum. We should establish ourselves in classical and Catholic studies in pursuit of wisdom, and really leave vocational questions and talk for the future. We shouldn't be sitting around with second graders saying, "Hey, Tommy, what do you want to do when you grow up?" Let's commit to a vocation when we're 8 years old. That's just stupid. The kids haven't even had a chance to explore different subjects, learn the Catholic faith, learn about the world, they haven't even had a chance to learn yet. And they're being asked to pick a career so that we can, play this game like, Amanda's going to be an astronaut and Tommy's going to be a doctor, and it's just ignorant, where we should just be focused on seeking wisdom and seeking to prepare ourselves to make good decisions about what we should do in real life circumstances, where all of this talk about what I want to do when I grow up is restricted by all kinds of providential details that are not necessarily in our control. So we've got to do things at the right time. And discerning vocations when one is 7 years old is not the right time for that work. And that goes for religious vocations as well. We'll see things like, Johnny likes to dress up like a priest when he's 8 years old and pretend he's saying Mass. That's cute, but he doesn't understand the priesthood yet. He doesn't understand the Catholic faith yet, doesn't understand what religious vocations are about yet. It would be better for Johnny to be studying grammar and reasoning and learning theology and so on, and actually be catechized, so that when the time comes for him to make the real decision to devote his life to the pursuit of the priesthood or to religious life, he can actually do that, right? We've got lots of these cute stories and Instagram videos of little kids dressed up like monks and nuns and all this kind of stuff, but they don't actually become priests and monks and nuns. Let's focus more on the reality of these vocations and not just try to have some cute photos during the kid's childhood. That's what I'm concerned with. I'm just being honest and realistic. So when we come to modern mathematics, we've got to assume we've already got a classical liberal arts study program in place. We're already working through grammar, which is called the gateway of the arts. We're already studying reasoning, learning the art of rational philosophy. We're already getting ourselves prepared so that we can introduce children to the study of classical philosophy and Catholic theology. By the time they're in high school, right? Not leave it for some imaginary college world that doesn't realize. We want to introduce those things when the kids are 13, 14, 15, before 18, when they start making their independent adult decisions. So we've got some preliminary or prerequisite studies that have to get done beforehand. The kids have to develop their reading comprehension and language skills to a level where they're ready to enter into philosophical or theological studies when they're, let's say, 14 years old. When we read that St. Dominic was sent to the university at 14, or other saints experienced similar things, the reason why they could do that was because they had completed courses of study in the quote-unquote grammar school, where they developed their language and proved themselves ready to handle the study primarily through reading at the university level. So grammar prepares us linguistically for the challenges of philosophical and theological studies, basically equips us with the language, the vocabulary and understanding that we need to communicate with wise men, to understand the words of wise men, so that we can enter into those studies early rather than later in life. If you're 30, 40 years old and you pick up Aristotle, even in English translation, you're going to find it's very difficult to read. If you pick up the Summa Theologica as an adult, you may find it's very difficult to read. It doesn't matter that you're 30, 40 years old, you've got a 12th grade reading level. It doesn't matter, because there is a mental framework, there's a way of thinking, there's a way of reasoning, there's a vocabulary that's assumed in those works. And classical grammar is what prepares students for that. Classical reasoning is what prepares students for that. And we've got to have that if we're going to prepare kids to enter into those studies. So with all of that established, we then come to the modern compulsory education standards. And there are 5 subjects that modern state requirements normally focus on. English language arts, most of which should already be covered in a good classical education. Foreign language, which should be covered in a good classical education because they're already into Latin and Greek, hopefully. Mathematics, now we can get into classical mathematics, the study of the quadrivium, and we teach that in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. But we're talking about modern practical mathematics when we talk about state requirements. So that's going to require special treatment. We then have the modern natural sciences, which again are not included in a classical education because we're studying philosophy and theology in a classical Catholic education. So modern natural sciences are going to require special treatment. And then lastly, we've got social studies, which should be covered by a classical education because we should be steeped in historical studies. Even the study of the Bible provides a student with the best possible survey or outline of human history, and it's infallible. So a good classical Catholic education, no kid should have any trouble with social studies preparation, history studies, and so on. That should be taken care of. We've got 2 subjects that we really have to give special attention to for modern requirements, and it's natural sciences and modern mathematics. So that leads us, and they're really related because the mathematics are studied for the sake of the natural sciences, of the modern sciences. So that brings us to this question of modern mathematics and how we should prepare for them. Now, as I said, the goal of modern mathematics is to apply them and use them in the modern natural sciences or in business and so on. But we've got to be realistic here, and this is where there's this conflict in modern education. Modern education loves presenting kids with this image that we're all participants in this progressive, expanding, high-tech, connected community. They love to give this image to the kids. All the kids have laptops. They've got wireless internet in the schools. They've got smart boards on the walls in the classrooms. No more chalkboards, nothing like that. Kids have tablets and Chromebooks and all of this high-tech. Everything is great. We're all connected. We're all on our phones and social media. It's all great until a kid pulls out a calculator and says, hey, I can figure this out with my calculator. Then all of a sudden, The whole message about high-tech society and all the benefits of technology and all of a sudden all get abandoned, and we tell the kids, no, 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 no. You have to learn how to do all of these calculations mentally or manually and so on. So we've got this conflict in modern education that we can't ignore. Modern teachers want the kids to just ignore this conflict, but we shouldn't ignore this conflict. There is a real objection raised against modern education by technology, because the technology can do what modern mathematics requires. And there's almost no other area in life where we force ourselves to learn to do things in ways that are not necessary in the name of preparing ourselves for participation in modern society. Think of another area where we practice doing things that are not actually necessary. We don't do it. Schools don't put emphasis on handwriting anymore because we type, and the teachers will explain that. They'll have the kids typing and learning to use computers and things, and they'll say, well, back when I was a kid, we had to copy our essays by hand, and we had to use our best penmanship when we made our final copies. I had to do that. I think it was like 7th grade when we started to get computers and printers and started using them for school. But before that, everything was in hand. Even through high school into college, it was essays were written out by hand in cursive and so on. Well, that's changed. We hardly ever use handwriting anymore, and most schools reflect that change by moving towards technology with much less emphasis on handwriting. And this is true in almost every area of our life. Where technology has led us to new methods, we don't continue training ourselves in the pre-technology methods until we come to modern mathematics. And then all of a sudden, you can't use, you shouldn't use calculators. You have to learn to do this mentally. You have to learn to do this manually, and so on. So we've got this conflict, and it causes a problem. What we want to do is satisfy the requirements as efficiently as possible. And again, if you're saying, but Tommy wants to be an engineer, look, that's for the future. That's not something to consider when the kid is 8, 9, 10, 12 years old. Those are professional, vocational decisions. And we can't allow them to hijack a Christian education. We can't allow this talk about what Tommy wants to do when Tommy hasn't even hit puberty yet. We can't allow this talk about the future to hijack a necessary Christian education that's aimed at wisdom. Even if we're thinking about business and professional life and things like that, these kids need wisdom to do these things. They need to be able to answer what problems even need to be solved before they start talking about what businesses they're going to do. Kids talk about being computer programmers and architects and all this stuff, but if you ask them, what are you actually going to program? What are you actually going to build? There's no real vision or plan for these careers. They're just thinking about, well, I heard that engineers make a lot of money, and I heard that computer programmers can work from home and set their own hours and only work 2 hours a day. It's silly talk. It's not real professional thought about business and sustainability and things like that. You need wisdom before you can even consider what you're going to do professionally. And modern kids just don't get it. Kids don't get it, and that's why we've got a number of problems with kids getting into their late 20s just having no clue what to do with their lives. And, if we ask, where did this problem come from? You can blame TikTok, you can blame mobile phones, you can blame the kids, but I would say trace it back into the education and see where they allowed these kids to mess around and dabble with all of this professional talk and future vocational talk and didn't ground the kids in the pursuit of wisdom, which should have come first. So we've got to make sure we stay focused on that. When we come to modern math, We're not raising engineers. We're not raising Einsteins. We're not all of this nonsense talk that we hear. We're seeking to satisfy modern requirements. If there's an individual student who at age 18, 19, 20 decides to devote his life to mathematics or decides to devote himself to a career in engineering or some heavy math-based field, he can do that as an adult. He can devote all of his college years to the study of mathematics in the best possible environment for those studies, surrounded by other math students, in the presence of the best math teachers, the best math tools and resources. He can just go all in, totally geek out in mathematics. That's the appropriate place and time to do that. And because it's a professional pursuit and he shows signs of success, that's part of the college admission process, right? If you apply to the state university math department or engineering program and get denied, what they're saying is you don't show signs of future success in this field. And that should be sort of a warning. But what we see kids do, and again, I hope you see as I sort of ramble here, that there's just problems within problems within problems in this modern thinking. What modern kids will do is apply to the math program at North Carolina State University, get rejected, where the math department or the admissions board says, no, you actually don't show signs of success for a future in mathematics or engineering. And what the kids are told to do is, well, then just apply to an inferior school. So you can apply to Goober Community College, and you could just do that and fulfill your dream to be a... Look, read the writing on the wall. If you're being turned down by college math programs and engineering programs, maybe you're not really as good at mathematics as you think you are. Now, I know that there will be all of these like random success stories where, Tommy did go to Goober State, ended up becoming, Einstein 2.0, and we'll have this nice story, and then everyone tells that same story. But that's the exception to the rule. And these are the kinds of things that represent reality, which we just don't take seriously in this generation with education. There are very, very few individuals who are going to study mathematics in a professional way, at a professional level, where they really need to devote themselves to those studies, and the proper place for that is in a modern university, the best possible university where mathematics is taught very strongly by the best mathematicians in the world. That's where that specialized, professional, mathematical, engineering, scientific education should be sought. Not in second grade, not in fifth grade, not in eighth grade. We should be concerned with satisfying state requirements because we've got a lot of other more important stuff to work on, and we can't allow some talk about a math career to justify a kid neglecting the Bible or neglecting the study of history or philosophy and so on. So when we come to modern mathematics, we present something like Ray's arithmetic series. It's an old series that was published in the 1800s, and we look at it, we say, man, this thing is really simple. That's the point. The point is that it's really simple. It's very streamlined, very efficient, very simple. Yeah, it was published in the 1800s. That's not that long ago, first of all. It's not like math has changed since then. The key of it is it's very simple. So it covers all of the terms and rules. Everything that the kids need to learn is in a simple series like that, especially at the elementary level. That's why it's helpful. It's helpful because it's simple and efficient. And that's why I recommend it. Now again, will that formation in mathematics prepare you for a world-changing career working for SpaceX or teaching at MIT? No, but that's not the intention of an elementary math program. The intention is to satisfy requirements while we pursue other priorities in our education. And that really carries us from, let's say, kindergarten through 6th grade. Then we come to the middle school and high school years where, talking about modern requirements, things get a little more serious. Now, you can continue through the RAISE series all the way into calculus. They cover the whole mathematical curriculum. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that. Again, you can do that. But what I recommend when you get to, let's say, grade 7, what I recommend, and it's just my recommendation, while I remain focused on the classical Catholic curriculum, what I recommend is using a series of textbooks. I think it's called OpenStax. They're free textbooks. Beautiful modern textbooks. They're available for free. We offer all of them in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy in our middle and high school math programs. These are modern math textbooks starting with pre-algebra and working up through calculus. So the whole high school / college math curriculum is available. But what I recommend is that students use those modern books, but just work through them quickly. Don't try to, it's not like studying scripture or the catechism where every single detail is important and we want to study it and reflect on it and discuss it and chew on it and so on. Study through these books quickly and check the boxes and complete your K-12 requirements because the standards are very low. Now, how can you know the standards? How can you know whether you're satisfying the standards? That's a question that parents sometimes ask. How do I know when enough is enough? Right? Because in these books, you'll see that there's 30 pages of information and examples and links to other resources, and it just goes on and on forever. There's hundreds of exercises and all kinds of stuff. How do I know that enough is enough? What I say is, you should have a balanced schedule for your studies established, and you should have a time scheduled for mathematics, and you should make the best use of that time that you can to get as much done as possible. And then at the end of the year, or whenever you want, you can take a standardized test. We offer the California Achievement Test in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. You can take a standardized grade level test and see where you're at. If you're ranking in the top 90th percentile for your grade level, everything is fine, and you're satisfying your grade level requirements. So that's what I would recommend. Let the standardized tests be your guide to satisfy the modern requirements, and just get those requirements finished without worrying about whether or not you're going to be able to move directly into a career at SpaceX. That's just nonsense. Satisfy the grade level requirements and use standardized tests, grade level, nationally standardized tests, as the measure to show that you are satisfying modern grade level requirements. It's really very, very simple. Now, the next challenge will be, well, what about SAT tests? What about college admissions tests and so on? College admissions tests live on their own island, as it were. And if you're concerned about the SAT, then what you should do is get an SAT prep book and start preparing specifically for the SAT. You should focus on the SAT as something completely separate from K-12 studies, because it really has nothing to do with K-12 studies. It is not a K-12. It is not a standardized test that measures grade level skills. It's not linked to some set of standards. It's a test that predicts college success. So it's not a high school test. It's not some cumulative high school test, which is how some people think about it, and they're wrong. The SAT is a predictor of college success. And I'll give you an example from my own life. I was a terrible high school student, just didn't know what I was doing, didn't understand school, had no support for education. I was a class clown in my public high school. My GPA in high school, I had a 2.3 GPA. I didn't study. I never read a book when I graduated high school. I was a terrible high school student, but I was in all honors classes because I was smart and my teachers knew I was smart. But I just had no idea what I was doing in school. I went to school to play sports. That was it. When the time came, my junior year, to take the SAT, sitting there with my 2.3 GPA, I scored 1320 on the SAT, and everyone went nuts because it made no sense. How in the world could a kid with a 2.3 GPA who couldn't pass algebra, never read a book, can turn around and score very well on a test which predicts college success? Because that test is testing things that are completely different than what's tested on a modern high school test. It's a completely separate thing, and it needs to be prepared for separately and specially. And so what happened? I took the SAT, did well on the SAT, went to college, became a straight A college student, graduated, was inducted into Phi Beta Kappa. The SAT was right. The SAT was right. My high school achievement had nothing to do with my future college achievement, and the SAT predicted that. So when it comes to the SAT, it really has nothing to do with K-12 studies. And let me say this. When we look at the 4-year high school math program, it's usually Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and then pre-calculus or trigonometry. And if kids get ahead, they can get into calculus in high school. The problem with all of that is the SAT has nothing to do with trigonometry or pre-calculus or calculus. The SAT tests nothing that isn't included in algebra and geometry. So courses that are often neglected in high school studies, algebra and geometry, are actually the courses that are most important on the SAT. So this rush to get into pre-calc and trigonometry and calculus doesn't transfer into a good SAT score, which affects college admission. So most of what people say about math studies is not even accurate. What I recommend and what we practice in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is be content to satisfy state requirements. And what I say is give to Caesar what Caesar actually requires of you. Don't give, there's no extra credit. There really isn't. Give to Caesar what Caesar requires and focus on the pursuit of wisdom, which is the priority of education. Prepare for the SAT separately and specially. And again, we provide for that in the CLA as well. The official SAT prep source is Khan Academy. They offer a whole SAT prep program for free. I don't think it's very good, but it's free and it's the official partner of College Board. I really recommend getting a test prep book like Princeton Review, something like that, where they get into the strategies for the test, understanding how the test works, and so on, because that stuff's really important. You have to understand how the test works to earn the highest possible score. And I say that as a former SAT prep teacher. But treat that separately. Check the boxes for K-12 math studies. Make sure you focus on the priorities and just get all that stuff done. Try to have a student at a point at age 17 where he's ready to make his big life decisions with all of the necessary information and experience in his head. He should understand all of the options available to him. He shouldn't think that he's got one option and it's to go to college at age 18. He should know that there's military careers available. He should know that there's religious vocations available. He should be exploring all of these different areas and trying to keep as many doors open, because his opinion of what things are going to be like is probably not going to be accurate. And so he's going to get in, experience things, change his mind, adjust things, change course again. He may do that a number of times, but it's important to make sure that all doors remain open and that he's able to go into those decisions at age 18, age 19 with as much knowledge and general preparation for the Catholic life, not just for some secular life, for the Catholic life as possible. That's really the goal of K to 12 education. And when we consider that it takes modern mathematics and it sticks them in their proper place and says, you're not allowed to come any further than that because we've got lots of other stuff to do. Don't start with your talk about being an astronaut and engineer. No. If that's what you want to do, you can choose to do that at age 18 when you actually apply to a university and go to college. You don't decide to do that in second grade. Now, I mentioned before getting admitted to a great college. You do not need to get admitted to MIT to enjoy a successful career in engineering or mathematics or so on. But my point was the time to prepare for those careers is actually in college. And so there's just a time and a place for these things. And the K to 12 curriculum is not the place to try to become the next Einstein. The K to 12 education is the place to actually develop a general education where you pursue wisdom itself, where you pursue virtue, you cultivate good habits, learn to become a good person, study moral philosophy, study theology, develop good devotional practices, and so on. Because if you have those things in place, the circumstances of Psalm 1 are going to be fulfilled in your life. Whatever he does shall prosper, the scripture says. You're not going to have to worry about the future if you live a good life. So that's my advice for K to 12 education, preparing kids for their adult lives. Now, there's one last thing I want to comment on before I finish up here. Let me grab a sip of coffee real quick. One more thing I'd like to say. I'd like to recommend you watch something. One of the most important modern tech companies is NVIDIA. I think that's how you pronounce it. They develop processors and things that are used by all modern devices. And what's happening is we see in our generation, we see the development of artificial intelligence, AI. We see all these programs developing. We see it's sort of invading all of our devices. It's on the smartphone now. You've got like Google, what is it called? I forget what it's called. Google whatever is the AI program. On the phone, Gemini. So you've got Gemini on the phone, you've got Chat GPT, all of these AI programs, right? And you wonder, where's all this going? And we've got all these kids at the same time saying, oh, I'm going to go be an engineer. I'm going to be a computer programmer. I want to work in computers. I want to do this. And if you listen to the CEO of NVIDIA, you listen to the CEO and what he says that AI is going to take away the need for computer programmers. Artificial intelligence is going to be better at computer programming than people because it doesn't take human rational soul to actually program computers effectively. AI is going to be able to do this. And the technology that's developing is developing so that a person who needs, let's say, a computer program to do something, take me as an educator, I'd like to do something. The artificial intelligence technology is developing so that I can tell the program what I need, and then the AI system will do the programming for me and deliver the program that I need. We're not going to need to do the coding work. So the CEO of NVIDIA, working to develop the actual hardware and technology needed for this, is saying this is where the future is going to be. And what he recommends, he mentioned this in a recent talk, he said students should be focused on liberal arts studies. Students should be focused on liberal arts studies because these careers of programming, all of this mechanical work, they're going to be obsolete. And what's actually going to be needed are people who direct the artificial intelligence to actually produce useful products. And It's going to take more of a general practical wisdom in solving problems and telling the AI what programs are necessary. But it's that general knowledge and prudence that's going to be needed to simply give the AI tools instructions for them to produce the code and the programs and so on. So the people on the very leading edge of technology, if you listen, instead of listening to just the ignorant chatter, on the ground, especially from schools trying to keep themselves in, surviving, rather than listening to them, if you listen to the people actually leading the fields in the real world that we're supposedly preparing kids for, they're saying the opposite of what people in modern schools are saying. They're saying the opposite. They're saying we actually need people to be who are able to come up with solutions to human problems, because the technology will not be in need of human work. So that's really where the future lies. I learned this also. Again, I mentioned I was a pre-med student, and I'm going to wrap up with this. We just hit an hour. But I mentioned that I was a pre-med student. I had a doctor as a kid, a doctor in Edison, New Jersey, that I went to through all my years. We had to go for sports physicals and things like that. But we all joked about this doctor because he was just like a clumsy, awkward, nerdy, uncomfortable person to deal with. You'd go in for a visit to the doctor and he'd have like spaghetti sauce on his tie. He was just this bumbling, clumsy goofball. And we always joked about our doctor, about our family doctor. He was the main doctor in town, but he was this awkward, weird person. And we always joked, and it turns out to be a real serious issue that these scientists, medical people, mathematicians, and so on, they just don't develop personal skills. They don't develop personal skills, which would make them much more successful. And even when I was a pre-med student, we were constantly being told by like medical school admissions advisors to not think that medical schools are looking for biology majors to apply to medical school. They're perfectly happy to have students applying from liberal arts majors and programs and so on. They're looking for general education. They're not necessarily looking for a bunch of science nerds to enter into these professional schools. So it's something that I want students to take seriously, that the overall benefit of a wise and virtuous life is going to do you much more good in the future than any specialized modern skill that you focus on, especially if you're focusing on a skill ignorantly and you don't realize that the field is already moving away from that. That's one of the problems with society, where technology is constantly changing, the market's constantly changing. Trying to prepare yourself for a future market that, if you could predict the market that accurately to figure out where you're going to put yourself 15 years from now, the best career for you would be investing in stocks, because you could just predict what the market was going to do and invest in it and make millions of dollars without doing anything. But that predicting business, we can't do that. We can't do that predicting. We have no idea where exactly different fields are going to be by the time we enter into them. And that's why the most prudent thing to do, and the thing that all wise men and saints recommend, is to focus on your development as a human person. Focus on the pursuit of wisdom, focus on the cultivation of virtue, develop your faith, study to understand Catholic theology, study moral philosophy, develop good manners, develop social skills, pay attention to your relationships, things like that. That's what you really need to focus on in your education. Just satisfy the requirements of grade level mathematics and leave professional studies for the university. That's where they belong. So if you look at the Classical Liberal Arts Academy curriculum, you'll see all this laid out. And that's why it is the way it is. It's not because we think these old books are neat and we think old stuff is cool. No, there's important information behind these decisions, very practical information behind these decisions. And we happen to use an older book just because a book with that philosophy, trying to be simple and efficient, those books are not published today. So we have to go back to where books were published that had that same mentality, and eventually we'll retype them and make them available in a fresh new print, and then everybody will think they're cool. But now, some parents hesitate because of chronological snobbery, and they see something old and they say, "Oh, it's old, it must be obsolete." No, it's not obsolete. It serves a different approach to mathematical studies that I would argue is more appropriate for grade level children. So that's my answer on modern mathematics. There's no aversion to modern math or sciences. There's no aversion to technical pursuits, to careers in engineering and mathematics, and no aversion to that at all. I'm just warning, as I think several popes have warned, that there's a danger of allowing these modern sciences, these modern studies, to just take over and remove from our education more severe and lofty studies like the 7 liberal arts, philosophy, theology, and so on. We have to make sure that we've got the right balls in the box first before we start adding math studies and things like that. And when there are requirements, we've got to make sure we're satisfying those requirements, practicing some, educational temperance, and realizing that there's a lot more to our studies than just math or some pride in having the highest possible score on a relatively meaningless third grade standardized test. That's really not what standardized tests are for. So I just warn parents to have some balance, to make sure priorities stay in place. And like I said, today, October 8th, happens to be the day when we read the passage about Martha and Mary in the gospel, and Jesus warned that one thing is necessary. Let's just make sure that we actually take care of the one thing necessary. I hope that's helpful. God bless.